Hello and welcome back to baking. Today I'm starting the second series on my channel where I'll follow the show I love. It's the Great British Bake Off. I wanted to bake through their challenges because frankly I've never heard about so many pastries and bakes that they do on the show. I'll start from season 1, episode 1, the signature bake challenge. In this challenge, we have to bake a signature cake. I've picked a Mediterranean tart from a French pastry magazine that I have. The tricky part for me here is that it's made for professional bakers, so the quantities there are a bit huge. In the recipe in the description though, I'll leave the ingredients that you need for one cake without any leftovers. So you'll see me using way more ingredients than you'll actually need. The first component to make is the almond sponge. First preheat the oven to 170 C or 335 F. We'll need 60 grams of egg yolks and 100 grams of egg whites, and that would be roughly 3 eggs. I always separate eggs using my hands, and trust me, this is the fastest and the safest way to do it. Just keep your hands obviously very clean. And once your eggs are ready, measure 100 grams of sugar, 100 grams of almond flour, and 50 grams of dried figs. Also get a lemon. Cut the figs into bite-sized pieces, somewhere around half a centimeter. To bake the sponge, you can use a regular round pan. However, you will need a cake ring to assemble it. I do recommend grabbing an adjustable one, like the one I got from IKEA. Otherwise, you will need a ring which is 1 inch bigger than your other ring or your cake pan, so 8 and 9 inches or 9 and 10 inches. Now let's make the sponge. First, add your egg yolks to a bowl. Then I divided the sugar into 50 grams and 50 grams and took one part. I zested lemon into it and then I gave it a quick rub with my fingers to get the lemon oils out. After that, whip the yolks and sugar together until they're thick enough to draw an 8 on the surface that would hold for at least 5 seconds, and this is your ribbon stage. One important note is start whipping as soon as you added sugar to the egg yolks. Never let them sit together even for half a minute. If you do that, it will cause the yolks to burn, which would create small dots of cooked egg yolk, and then once it happened, there is no way to fix it, so those yolks would be unfortunately gone. Now the egg yolks are whipped, and I hope you can see the texture from this close-up here. As you can see, it's very stable, probably quadrupled in volume, and extremely light. The next step is to whip the egg whites. They should be at room temperature because it will give you a more stable final result. Start whipping at medium speed, but do not add sugar until there is no more liquid egg white visible. Add sugar slowly, about a tablespoon at a time. Wait until it dissolves completely after each addition. After I added all the sugar, as you can see, the egg whites are still very liquid. They don't hold their shape, so we'll continue whipping for longer. I want the egg whites to reach medium peaks because if I whip them to stiff peaks, then it would take much more mixing later to get an even texture for the sponge batter. Also, over whipping beyond stiff peaks can get you tiny pieces of egg white in the batter, and then you just won't be able to get rid of it. Obviously, in this case, your sponge will be less fluffy and not as soft. As you can see, now my egg whites can hold the shape in the bowl, so I'm happy with it. Now both parts of the egg are whipped, so we can continue with our sponge batter. Add all almond flour to the egg yolk. Now you need to mix it fairly fast, but at the same time a little bit gentle, but don't be too gentle because that's what I notice in many baking videos, that people are trying to fold too gently and then they actually deflate the batter much more than they could. Then take some of the egg white, maybe about a quarter, and add it to your egg yolk / almond flour mixture. The idea here is to loosen up that egg yolk mixture a little bit so that when we add the rest of the egg white, it doesn't take as much effort to mix everything together and we don't deflate the mix that much. Again, try to mix everything fairly quickly, but at the same time don't be too gentle. You'll see that I'm trying to go around the bowl and scrape it quite well and then go through the middle And don't leave any almond flour or egg yolk at the bottom of the bowl because that's a pretty common issue when you don't mix your sponge batter really well. Mix it until there are no more streaks of the egg yolk mixture visible. However, be careful not to deflate the batter too much. It may take some time to master that correct spatula motion, so don't worry if you don't get it right from your first cake. Now grab the smaller cake ring or the cake pan, whichever one you're using. I usually don't grease the sides of the pan or the cake ring because from my experience that gives you the best height of the sponge. However, you can grease it with butter or let's say some other fat, but you have to apply some flour on top of that. If you use fat only, your sponge will not rise. For the bottom, if I use a cake ring, I'll use a baking tray with a silicone mat on top, or if I'm using a cake pan, then I'll use a circle of parchment paper at the bottom. Next, grab the figs and sprinkle them all over the top of the sponge, and then send it to the oven for about 25-30 minutes at 170°C or 335°F, but keep an eye on the sponge because every oven is different. You want a golden brown top when it's ready, and it should bounce back when you press it. Now let's make the goat cheese mousse. Beforehand, I soaked gelatin in water and let it sit there for maybe 5-10 minutes to get soft. Take the goat cheese, 100 grams of sugar, about 3/4 of milk, the egg yolks, and the cornstarch, and mix everything together. Here I realized that unfortunately my glass was too small, so I took a bigger one, and then just use hand blender to blend everything together until smooth. Don't forget to scrape the sides time to time. Now it's time for Italian meringue. It's basically made of sugar syrup that is boiled till certain temperature, for example 121°C in our case, and egg whites. So we start whipping egg whites while the sugar is getting to the temperature we need, and then once the egg whites are slightly frothy, we start pouring boiling sugar down the bowl. The tricky part here is to get that right moment when your egg whites are whipped enough to start pouring the syrup, but at the same time your syrup must be at the right temperature. So you might play with your mixer speed or your stove heat to get everything ready at the same time. Once you've added all syrup, keep whipping on a medium to high speed until the egg whites reach stiff peaks. That should take about 5 to 7 minutes. Now let's get ready to assemble the cake. First, I had to cut out the 8-inch circle from my sponge because, as you remember, I had way more ingredients than I needed. My entire sponge was maybe 12 inches, but with the ingredients I gave you, you don't have to do that, so you'll have the proper size. Now that's the moment where things almost went really wrong. What I did is I added gelatin mass to the goat cheese mixture and I let it sit on a table as I was preparing my cake ring and sponge to be ready for the mousse. The problem is that the goat cheese mixture started to set, which, as you'll see now, will cause me some troubles while mixing with the Italian meringue. As I realized that it started setting, I tried to work super fast, so I mixed everything quickly and poured the mixture into my egg whites. Now in this moment, I also realized that I slightly overweight my egg whites and they were a little bit grainy, so essentially I used all my folding skills to A, quickly mix everything, B, break down the egg whites pieces, and C, make sure it doesn't set until I pour it over the sponge. And of course, as I was doing all that, I had to make sure that I kept as much air as possible and didn't deflate the mousse. Once I was happy with my mousse's consistency, I poured it over the sponge into the prepared cake ring. Just make sure you don't forget to cover the bottom with some plastic wrap, otherwise all the mousse will just spill out all over the table. Next, I used an offset spatula to get rid of some of the large bubbles on the surface or pieces of the egg white and just put it in the fridge overnight. Welcome to the next day. I took the cake out of the fridge, it set really nicely, so now I'm gonna transfer it to the plate. It was a little bit tricky because the mousse is quite soft, so I used a few offset spatulas, and a cake carrier to help me with this task. To decorate the cake, we're gonna make red wine caramel. I already have 150 grams of sugar in my pot. Then I add 45 grams of dry red wine and 20 grams of liquid glucose. Now we'll cook our caramel until 155 degrees C because we want to keep the red color. Otherwise, if we cook it further, it will start turning brown. Check the temperature with the thermometer, and once it's ready, take it off the stove and pour it over a silicone mat. Make sure you work really fast because otherwise caramel will set before you have the opportunity to spread it fairly thin on your mat, because you want the shards to be quite thin and nice. Now let's decorate the cake. So first I removed the acetate from the sides of the cake, and then I picked up some fresh figs, our red wine caramel, and also some pistachios and some walnuts. I'm gonna take the nuts and arrange them on the sides of the cake. After that, I took a couple of fresh figs and cut them in quarters. Then I broke my caramel layer into smaller pieces that I will use for the decoration later. Then I picked up a few pieces of caramel that I like the most, and I arranged them together with a few slices of figs on top of the cake. Usually this is the most difficult part for me because my artistic side requires a lot of work still. And finally, our Mediterranean tart is ready. First, a few words about the recipe itself. Like any other professional recipes, yes, it had huge quantities and very brief instructions. Luckily, I know how to navigate through both challenges, but for someone with less baking experience, I would imagine it would be a big problem. However, yes, considering this is a magazine for pastry chefs, it was expected to be written in that way. In terms of the taste, the tart itself is really nice. The nuts and dried figs work amazingly well with the goat cheese, and the mousse was really soft, just like a cloud. You can still taste a bit of a goat cheese flavor, so if you're not a fan, then probably this tart is not for you. But overall, I was really pleased and satisfied with the result. And that's it for today. Thank you for watching the video, and I'll see you next time.